everywhere.
Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach. And we're coming to you on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Remember, we emphasize to everyone, please spread the word for a bunch of people, as many people as you can, to become a Crusade Channel premium member. You get access to all of the station's content with King Dude and Rick Barrett, Kennedy Hall, and not just Frontline with Joe and Joe, and a whole bunch of others. I mean, it's a great, great cause. See, I say that because Crusade Channel is more than just a radio station, okay? With a bunch of Catholic dudes, just ranting about stuff. It's a cause. We're involved in a culture war. It's one of the things we are going to be talking about today at the front line with Joe and Joe, about Austin Ruse talking about the culture war, okay? So in that war, there's a lot of battles and there's divisions, just like in an army, and you have your divisions. Well, one of the divisions in the culture war is the Crusade Channel. And the Crusade Channel is worthy of your support. And if you have Netflix and HBO and the rest of it, and I'm not begrudging you if you do, well, then you should become a Crusade Channel premium member, because if you could give those godless people in Hollywood your money, then obviously keeping a cause like the Crusade Channel going is a very important thing. We also always ask, of course, that because, you've always been very supportive, all you Crusaders out there, everybody in our chat room and everything. And, the front line with Joe and Joe has kept going because you guys, you value what we have to say. And obviously we feel really good about that. And we want to get that word out more. Please, wherever you find us, on social media, okay, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, all of it, Rumble, like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff, and help us out a little bit. And I also will give a plug to the Veritas Catholic Network Radio, where Joe and I have our Sunday afternoon at 5 o'clock. We do our interview shows. We got some really good ones in the queue coming up every single week. We recently did an interview with Tim Gordon and Andrew Willard Jones, and just some very, very informative people. Again, we need to know what's going on, but in order to know what's going on, you need to be listening to the voices that are out there that are making these things known, like the Crusade Channel, like all the people that Joe and I are interviewing. So Veritas Catholic Radio Network, you could download their mobile app and you can listen to our interview shows that air on Sundays at 5 o'clock in the New York metropolitan area. But it's a download, so it's a podcast, so you can listen to all of our shows. We have a great conversation for you tonight, okay? And the reason why I say it's great is, look, Joe and I have been saying, even before we met the King Dude and Crusade Channel, we just started out. It was me and him, and I think the only two people watching were our wives. That was it. And we get into all the individual stories that you can find here. Tonight, we're going to get into a little bit of that. But these are larger topics, okay, that we want to talk about. Because I think Clarence Thomas, he's a hero of ours, okay? We know the left can't stand him, which is disgusting because that's not racist in their mind. But if I'm critical of Don Lemon, somehow that's racist because he's black and gay, okay? But you could criticize Clarence Thomas all you want and nothing happens to you, okay? He's a great man. He's a great Catholic, okay? And he gave a speech recently at Notre Dame where he touched on a few things that Joe and I want to talk about. As I said earlier, Austin Ruse asked a question recently in Crisis Magazine, are the culture wars over? Absolutely not. If you listen to some conservatives, you would think they're over. No, the culture wars are alive. Okay, I hesitate, Joe Resinello, to say they're alive and well, okay, because I don't know how well a culture war could be, but the culture wars are alive, and we need to talk about that. Catholic education, okay? I think in a lot of circles in the Catholic world, Clarence Thomas just gave a speech at Notre Dame. Notre Dame has not been living up to, and it's just respectful criticism. They've not for a long time been living up to their mission. We need to talk about what Catholic education is, because if you want to know what's going to save America, that is a very, very big part of it. And now we got to get into some of the atrocities. This abortion bill that's being thrown around at the federal level. Okay, Biden's abortion bill, call it Pelosi's abortion bill. Bill Donahue has something to say about that. Joe Resinello, they talk about pregnant people. Pregnant people. I always thought it was a pregnant woman because there is no other type of pregnant person other than a pregnant woman. Okay, you know that all too well.
I was just gonna say, yeah, pretty much.
So it's like, that's like, what's his name? Becerra wasn't willing to tell Senator Langford he wasn't willing to use the word mother. He wanted to say birthing person. He actually said, Joe Resinello, he said, well, I have to look into the law and see what the language is. To use the word mother, you have to look into the law. Joe, I don't get it. Now, there are some. Now, I know that all the good people out there at the Crusade Channel know how brave we all are. And I say it in a very humble way, okay, because we're all risking something. There's a dude, faithful Catholic, okay. His name is Basile, like your friend, Joe, like Basil.
Anthony Basile. Shout out, Indiana, baby, love it.
And but this gentleman, Tom Basile, is a faithful Catholic. He's on Newsmax, and I think you're going to be interested in some of the things that he has to say about putting faith first, our Catholic faith first. And then we're going to get into we'll probably not get into everything else. There is a pretty disgusting story that we need to talk about. Not disgusting because of the woman that was confronted a school board, but the content of what she was confronting them over is pretty nasty stuff. Joe and I grew up in the Newark area in New Jersey. There's not too many things that we hear that can offend us, to be quite frank with you, okay? But the stuff that's in this children's book in a library that this mother was ranting against, I hesitate to use some of the language, but it's a story we're going to have to talk about. And if we finally get to it, I think the numbers show with Joe Resinello, at least as far as the congressional races in 2022, because they're not going to be able to really, I think, hooky-dook with a lot of those races. They're in purple districts or red districts or close districts. I think the Democrats are going to get their asses handed to them. That's just, again, that's just not just historical. I think what's going to be historical is the extent to which they're going to get their butts handed to them. But I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm very happy to talk about Clarence Thomas. I really am. It actually, when I look at him, he's a hero. Again, we say all the time on the show, Joe and I are married to black women. We're not married to them because they're black. We're married to them because they're Catholic and they're great women. Okay, they live the faith as good as imperfectly as we all do. And I look at Clarence Thomas the same way. Okay, I don't look at him as the black Supreme Court justice. I look at him as, number one, the best Supreme Court justice, and throw on top of it that he is a faithful Catholic, and his life has been a journey. Joe, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, as Joe said, basically, Clarence Thomas, he had an interesting journey, and I think that's why we titled the show about a compass, because obviously God is the compass, and we're all on a journey to heaven. That's the name of the game. And Clarence Thomas always wasn't the way he is now. He is the closest thing we have in the Supreme Court to a natural law jurist. That's what we want as Catholics. We're not necessarily looking for a constitutionalist, while I do want the Constitution to be interpreted in its original form. We want natural law jurists. Clarence Thomas is also a daily communicant, which guides you in life. When you receive the Eucharist in the state of grace every day, whether you're a brilliant man like Clarence Thomas is, who went to Yale University Law School, or you're just a regular person, it will guide you and give you clarity of both mind, heart, and sight, and as well as hearing things, not just not just hearing, but listening and comprehending. And that's just what he does. So basically, Star Parker, who is the author of this particular article, opines regarding Clarence Thomas. And this is what he had to say. He said, recently, Justice Thomas gave a speech at Notre Dame, as Joe alluded to, on the Declaration of Independence. And Thomas told his own story and how his life journey led him to understand what America was all about. He grew up very poor in Savannah, Georgia, near Savannah, Georgia, raised by his grandparents under the tutelage of his grandfather, who was a devout Catholic and an American patriot. Thomas's grandfather understood that the injustices of the country were not about the flaws in the country, but about the flaws in human beings. And I want to talk about that in living up to ideals handed down to them. This is so true. I mean, if you look at how this country was structured, the people who structured it, and I would recommend you read Liberty's Lions, a gentleman who we interviewed, Dan Leroy, great guy, wrote a book on the Catholics who helped influence the founding of our country. It's a brilliant like model. It really is. Checks and balances. I mean, everything. It's all there. The problem, in my view, isn't necessarily the structure. It's the people. And what do I mean by that? We're flawed, but we've thrown God out of the society. That's the problem. John Adams, who was a founder, said this very clearly from the very beginning. He said the system will not work without moral people.
Right.
Without moral people. And that's the problem right there. I mean, the flaws are the people themselves. I mean, when you look at, and listen, people are unfazed by a lot of very bad things that are going on because they identify with political identity and political tribalism, and they close their eyes to some very horrible things that are going on in America. And that's what he's saying there. He's saying, listen, the issue isn't the country. The issue is the people. And Joe, you could kind of opine on that, I'm sure.
I just want to point out but remember, you're dealing with, on the one hand, people who know that there's a God, generally speaking, Christians. Okay. If you're talking about the founders. Okay. I know a lot of people, oh no, they were just deists. No, they, John Adams was a Christian. Okay. It's not unheard of because of our fallen human nature, Joe Resinello, that yes, we know the right way to do things. Now, this applies to our personal lives, but this applies to society in general, okay? Or the structure of a particular society, like, let's say, America. It's not hypocritical to say we ought to live a certain way, but we fall short of that. And I think the left uses that to club, particularly our founding fathers, okay, over the head. Because if I said to someone, you really shouldn't do heroin, okay, it's a bad thing. You need to get off it. You need to get help. Let's say they were addicted to heroin. Does that mean I'm perfect? Does that mean I don't fall? Does that mean I don't have my own little personal addictions, okay, whatever they might be, okay, temptations, whatever the case. But that doesn't mean I can't still propose something that's truthful to someone else. And that's the problem with our founding documents. They constructed something that was good, okay, and embraced universal ideas. As you say all the time, if you don't believe in gravity, jump off the building. It applies to you whether you like it or not. The rights of man apply to everybody, okay? These are men who fell, not individually, let's say, but as a society, still were not living up to that idea. The problem is the left uses that to club the founding fathers and say, yeah, but you were slave owners, so we don't have to listen to that. No, you see, what you're doing is you're taking the faults of the individual people and you're saying that every idea they have is then wrong because, let's say, Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner, okay? And that's what you're dealing with now. Thomas, okay, Clarence Thomas, he thought about it, okay? He became disillusioned, okay? And according to the article by Star Parker, became disillusioned because Martin Luther King had been assassinated. He fell into cynicism and bitterness. And Joe, where do we see cynicism and bitterness? BLM. You know what I mean? Like when you see movements like that, everything is meant to tear things down. But then he came to realize, and he thanked, by the way, his nuns and his grandparents, because he realized that the ideas that are embodied in the Declaration of Independence are still ideals that we need to live up to. And he hearkened to his grandfather, who understood that person. See, Joe, this is why being Catholic is so important, because we understand it perfectly. Very flawed people can say some very good, true, and beautiful things and strive to live up to those things, okay? The problem is we as Catholics are tolerant of the flaws of human beings. I don't think the left is. I think, in other words, you need to achieve their perfection or else you're, as we've said on the show at the Frontline with Joe and Joe a million times, you're what Hillary Clinton called irredeemable. Does that make sense, Joe?
Well, I think it does, but I think it's also important, as you highlighted, he was disillusioned, as he should be, by the assassination of Martin Luther King, who also, by the way, was a flawed man. He was an adulterer. That is a fact. And it not just a few one-offs. Martin Luther King, this is documented, was a philanderer, but he was a great man. You see, this is where they're not consistent. To a degree. I mean, that is a flaw. If you're a philanderer, he had children and a wife. And that doesn't, in my view, any way, shape, or form. He's a great American. What he did was fantastic.
Joe, let me ask you a question real quick, just along those lines, real quick. The individual who legalized Christianity in the Roman Empire was Constantine. Now, when you look up and down human history, Constantine was a very flawed leader, had members of his own family killed. Okay. He was a Roman emperor. Does that then now negate the action of recognizing Christianity as a religion of the Roman Empire because he happened to be a person not necessarily living up to those standards? You're exactly right. I'm only bringing it up as an example. You're exactly right. But you and I, again, are tolerant and understand that very flawed people can do very good things and also say very good things, okay? The left doesn't seem to give that pass. But go ahead. I'm sorry. I cut you off.
It's okay. Basically, I just want to, as Joe said, he was disillusioned when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and he says he was filled with bitterness in a sense that America was irredeemable, flawed. It was a racist nation, which, brings us to the spirit of today. But I want to give you his exact words because I think this could kind of show his journey a little bit, and I find it to be interesting. This is what Thomas said. What had given my life meaning and a sense of belonging, that this country was my home, was jettisoned as old-fashioned and antiquated. It was easy and convenient to fill the void with victimhood. So much of my time focused intently on our racial differences and grievances, much like today. This is the important part. As I matured, I began to see that the theories of my young adulthood were destructive and self-defeating. Now, this is a black man. This isn't me talking. I had rejected my country, my birthright as a citizen, and I had nothing to show for it. The wholesomeness of my childhood had been replaced with an emptiness, cynicism, and despair. I was faced with the simple fact that there was no greater truth than what my nuns and grandparents had taught me. We are all children of God and rightful heirs of our nation's legacy of equality. We had to live up to the obligations of the equal citizenship to which we were entitled by birth. You see, this is a man who has come full circle, and I personally think it's because of his Catholic faith. Thomas is a righteous man. Is he a perfect man? No. But he is a righteous man who, by the way, was victimized by the system, not only as a young man, because he grew up in the segregated South, but Thomas was accused of something he did not do. And they tried to destroy him.
In the same way, Joe Resinello, in the same way that the left always rails against false accusations and accusing black men of this, that, or the other, they tolerated and encouraged Anita Hill to say what she said about him. Joe, I'm going to tell you this right now. I can't wait for the day when the next time it happens. We remember in our lifetimes it happened with Anita Hill. We could also look at Brett Kavanaugh, what happened with Christy Blasey Ford. Okay. I can't wait for the day for a senator to look at them right in the face and say, "You're a liar." Not because I know everything about what you're saying, because I know this guy is incapable of that. Clarence Thomas is incapable of what they did. And he was right. By the way, it's always interesting, Joe, with the left. When you call them out on their BS, on their terms, that's when their brains, Joe Resinello, splatter all over their foie gras and their Grey Goose martinis. Clarence Thomas called them racist. How did he call them racist? He says, this is nothing but a high-tech lynching. But who was he accusing of the lynching? The left. You know what? You know where I'm
Oh,
going with that?
absolutely. But that goes
And it's
right
so
past
and it's
people.
so unjust. And if I was Clarence Thomas, and given what he's saying here, okay, if I'm Clarence Thomas, I'm thinking in my mind, well, now I know who the new oppressors are. Maybe it was white racists in the South. We talked about Archbishop Brummel a couple of weeks ago. He had to contend with white Catholic segregationists in the South. Okay, but Clarence Thomas saw straight up, Joe, right in front of his face, the level to which the left's racism goes if you're a black man but you don't toe the liberal left line. And so Joe, I want to continue this conversation. This is a very important conversation. It exposes a lot about what the left does and also speaks to the character. And I want you to get into that, Joe, on the other side of the break. The character of this man, okay? Because I'm usually the one who's throwing bombs at people. You're the one who's more reasonable, okay? I want to come back and talk about the character that this man had to have, not just as a youth dealing with his disillusionment, but then all of a sudden he's up for the Supreme Court in this supposedly irredeemably racist nation, and they're calling him all sorts of names. Let's go to a break, Joe. You're listening to the Crusade Channel. You're home for the Mike Church Show, Crusade Channel News, the Barrett Brief, and the Kennedy Profession. From sunup to sundown, the Crusade Channel is the last live radio station standing. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, and I'm joined by, as always, Joe Resinello on the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. Joe, we ended the last segment talking about Thomas's character, and you talked about his journey, because obviously your journey, all of our journeys, all right, this is the Catholic worldview. The journey is what forms you. It's God moving you through that journey, and through ups, downs. A lot of people have downs. Clarence Thomas obviously had some downs. You're formed into the man or woman that God wants you to be. I'd love for you to comment a little bit more about his character, especially given all the things he had to go through, both young and as he got older.
Well, clearly he's a man of character. Even if you read some of his dissents as of late to the court, I mean, to be honest with you, I believe he's beholden to the truth and the Constitution, and that's just what you want a jurist to be. But speaking specifically to what he said at the Notre Dame, speech that he just gave on the Declaration, he said something that really struck me that I did some thinking on when I read this article. He said this. He said, "There are many more of us, I think, who feel America is not so broken as it is adrift at sea." Okay, let's talk about that, because that's interesting.
Okay. Yes,
because in my view, because clearly we have a lot of issues. And frankly, I think America is in trouble because we talk about this all the time. It's thrown God out of society. Western civilization in general is in trouble, but God is at work. I heard a priest recently say that in this last COVID period, he's never seen God more at work. I thought that was interesting. God uses things when men and women don't move in the direction that he wants us to. Clearly, we're going in a bad direction and people don't want to hear things. I personally think we're probably 50 years in. It started in the late 60s into a trial. I mean, people aren't formed from a Catholic perspective. Families are falling apart. And frankly, it's not over. We're just seeing the bad fruit of decades of bad ideas, bad structures, and we're watching things fall apart. And I think it's going to continue. But ultimately, possibly from the ashes, and many scholars have said this, Anthony Eslin being one, John Horvat being another. John Horvat refers it to as the prodigal son. The prodigal son will return. Ultimately, people will come to their senses. And how? Not because anyone says it, because they're ignoring the truth. They don't want to hear it. Their ideas are going to collapse under the weight of their own idiocy.
Can I chime in on that?
Sure.
I saw something interesting recently, Joe. I've softened. When you start practicing the faith again after having not practiced it for so long, you become real fire and brimstone, and I've been guilty of that. Okay. No, 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 no. You got to do this. You got to do. Listen, God has humbled me plenty of freaking times. Okay. So I become very understanding of people's journeys. Okay. I would not have liked Clarence Thomas, evidently, in the 1960s. He might have been borderline Black Panther, America's irredeemably, racist. By the way, the left would have loved him if he stayed in that frame of mind. I saw a video recently that I thought it really helps me in terms of my understanding that we're all on a journey. Every one of us, okay? Just because some of us are not so well known, some of us are known, some of us are, a couple people know us, whatever the case might be. Dave Rubin, he was an atheist. He's a homosexual. He's in a marriage, he's so-called gay marriage. And he was a liberal. He started out on the Young Turks. Okay. I saw him recently in a conversation with Matt Fradd. Okay. I like Matt Fradd. Matt Fradd, he's Australian. He's a very, very good Catholic apologist. And he talks to a lot of different people. He's much more tolerant, Joe Rossinello, than I could ever be. Okay. And Dave Rubin said, now, not only has Dave Rubin gone politically and culturally from the left to the right, he did that a number of years ago when he left. He now came back and he said, he told Matt Fradd, I'm no longer an atheist. And the reason why I'm bringing that up, Joe Rossinello, at the front line with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, is because as I was reading our stories and going over them and preparing for the show, I'm thinking, you know what? Clarence Thomas was on a journey. Dave Rubin is on a journey. God will find you where you are. Clarence Thomas, Joe Rossinello, he could have fallen so deeply into, let's say, Black liberation theology that was going around at that time, Black Pantherism, militantism, all that. Everything was right there for him to have an excuse to do that, but he did not do that. And I bring it to Dave Rubin only because Dave Rubin also told Matt Fradd, he goes, I kind of looked around at the world and I see everything that's going on, and I said, no, even though it's really messy out there, there is something more. Now, Dave Rubin is not, he's not, I don't think, a theist per se, but he's certainly not an atheist. And I think that that's an important message for people, that everybody's on their journey. And Clarence Thomas was obviously on a journey for, going back, as we're highlighting in the, from this article from Star Parker. But he's gone to such a high level. In other words, like, he's impactful. He's a Supreme Court justice, and he doesn't shy away from the fact that God did not abandon him to that cynicism and that bitterness, okay, that he raised him up to do great things. I mean, what are your thoughts? I know I was a little muddled there, but I was just trying to make a little parallel, because to me, I love when people, when God helps people to see the truth of things.
Well, there's always hope where there's God. And again, going back to the prodigal son, I mean, I'm sure the father, before the son went off on his journey away from him, told him, and he ignored him, and he had to learn for himself. I see that as the American journey as of late, from probably, the sexual revolution in the 60s till now. So we're talking 50 years in, and now we're seeing a lot of the bad fruit of decades. This isn't new. I mean, Ratzinger in 1969 basically told the world what was happening in the church in 1969. So, I mean, this isn't new. This is decades of happening. Why do I say that? And I'll harken back to Esalen in his book, Out of the Ashes. At the end, he basically says, people wake up. This is what Ratzinger says too. They wake up. That will happen. Now, how long do we go adrift? This is the patience of God. This is how people, remember, the Israelites, 40 years in the desert, he punished them. Constantly, they were enslaved by Egypt. These are things that mold people. Look at the Polish people during the 20th century. They're some of the best American Catholics I know, because they were molded through experience, fire. I believe, however long it will take, I do believe in the American spirit, We are a great people at our core, Americans. We were revolutionists. We came to this country with nothing and we took a chance. Everybody's got a story in this country, their family. We just went adrift, and it's bad. It's bad. Don't get me wrong. I'm not undercutting the bad fruit that we're seeing, but what I am saying is God sees it. And when you don't want to help yourself, God intervenes. And through this darkness, he could easily turn it around by bringing things to the light of day through suffering. And frankly, Joe, that's what I think is going to happen.
And that's one of the things that we as Catholic men and all Catholics, especially, you know, all people out there at the Crusade Channel, always on air, always online at crusadechannel.com, all those listening to the Frontline with Joe and Joe. That's one thing, Joe, that we have to push back on atheists. Just as you know, only because you brought it up, it triggered something in my mind. In other words, suffering is part of the world. That's it. And no matter how much human effort you try to put into it, you are going to do nothing to alleviate pain and suffering. Nothing whatsoever. I don't care if you got $1 gazillion in the bank or you have nothing in the bank. Okay? You're going to suffer. Father Stan Fortuna has a rap video, as a matter of fact, came out a few years ago talking about suffering. Okay? Was actually very popular on YouTube. He's a priest of the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal. You're going to suffer. Get it through your head. The atheists try to say that because God allows suffering, that means he doesn't exist. No, no, no. What do you think? If God didn't exist and we were just on this planet, what do you think? You're going to, through some act of the human will, you're going to alleviate pain and suffering? I mean, think of it this way, and we've used this example on the show a million times. You know the way they want to alleviate pain and suffering, Joe? They just kill people. Well, Down syndrome is a pretty bad thing. So therefore, in Iceland, they just kill all the Down syndrome kids. Well, alleviated pain and suffering, not for the kid, okay? In other words, but that's your solution. Like with the left and the atheists, the solution is always death. In other words, abortion. You're 18 years old. You don't have a job. You don't have an education. You're going to suffer if you have your baby. So kill your baby. Like that's their, you know, it's like that's their thing. And the thing is, like, mature people, like Clarence Thomas, you mentioned in this article, Joe, he said, well, when I was younger, I thought a certain way. It reminded me of St. Paul. And you know what? This is a very important message. We all know it here at the Crusade Channel. We all know it, okay? When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I learned to put away childish things. Childish things, Joe, are things like thinking you're going to have a world that you're going to overcome pain and suffering, that you're going to overcome evil. The only way you can, okay, you're not going to overcome pain and suffering. That's part of life. But overcoming evil requires relying on God. And America, as you said, hearkening back to what you said, and I'm going to hand it back over to you. We're not broken. We're not. We had slavery from the beginning, and we were not a broken nation, but we were, and at times have been adrift. But that requires reform, not destruction. I think that's the important distinction to be made.
I hear you. And again, you have to play the long game, because ultimately the ship will get written correctly by the fact that I believe, listen, in many ways, the left has won. But because of their victory, they will lose, Joe. It's just a question of when. You see, because their ideas are bad. And this is not like a subjective comment. What's this? Patrick Deneen says the same thing. It will collapse under the weight of their own ideas. That's right. What he says. Leftist ideas.
It's unsustainable.
It's unsustainable. And that's what brings me back to that question of, from the ashes, something will come. It will. It's a matter of time. Now, granted, we want to mitigate the trouble. We want to educate, but sadly, people don't want to hear it. God will right the ship. He will, because ultimately the prodigal son, when he is face down in the pigsty, will come to his senses. We have not bottomed out yet. it could get far worse.
Joe, that's one of the, I'm glad you bring up the prodigal son, because it's one of the reasons why the prodigal son, I believe, I haven't read this anywhere. One of the reasons why I believe the prodigal son is probably the parable of Jesus that's the most popular is because there are a lot of people that identify with the prodigal son. Okay, that's right. God's not going to intervene after you've taken your money from your father and embark on your journey into the dark place. Okay. He may not intervene while you're there and having a grand old time. Okay. He'll wait till you're face deep, feeding the pigs the pods you wish you could eat. And that's when he steps in. But he needs to let you do that. Again, our modern world, Joe, and again, we're talking about America here because we're talking about Clarence Thomas at the front line with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel. Okay, the modern world thinks the pain and suffering, and getting to, like, the God who would let you get to that point is an unjust God. No, the God who lets you get to that point is a good Father. Father Rutler points that out all the time. God loves us too much not to punish us. Why would he intervene with the prodigal son while he's on the way to the dark place, where he's basically going to live what we would call now the sex, drugs, and rock and roll culture? That's why he asked the old man for the money. Okay, I want to go out, I want to get laid, get drunk, get high, and I want to just party. Okay, and I'll have the money to do it. It doesn't make sense for God to intervene at that point, because the kid is still going to have in his mind that he wants that. No, God has to let us go through that. Okay, he has to let us go through that. And that's, I think, an important lesson for America. Okay, and Joe, I'm with you. We're unfortunately, and you and I might be dead by that time. Okay,
Probably will be.
Probably will be. But in the meantime, Joe, America is still too damn comfortable with itself, thinking we're the great. And I want you to comment on this, if you don't mind.
There's no doubt about it.
I
mean, our refrigerator's too full and we still have money in the bank. I mean, like, you know, when you compare to like what other countries deal with on a day to day, I mean, Joe, that's where we're at. I mean, we've gotten too comfortable. That's what happened in our church too. Money, you lose focus on things.
Yeah.
Money isn't evil, but when you have it, you can easily lose focus. That's part of the reason why we're where we are. And frankly, as Benedict said, and this same idea belongs, you know, it parallels what's happening in the church. Through the remnant, the world will see something it's missing. You see, that's what's going to happen. Eventually, things are going to get, I mean, you think it's dark now? It could get so much darker. And it will. Because, again, these ideas aren't sustainable. But from it, because God never abandons you. He never does. How many cycles in history? You know, and even if, like, whatever happens to America, like, from the ashes, something will come up anew. It's just the way the cycle goes.
Joe, God the Father sent his own people into slavery for 400 years.
There you go.
And drew out the greatest good in all of human history, which is Christ, the incarnation, and then the subsequent passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. But he had to let his people go into slavery, okay, mainly because of their own disobedience, okay, but nonetheless, and he was patient. And I don't care what the Protestants say, God did not condemn Pharaoh to hell. In other words, God tried to show Pharaoh the error of his ways, but leaving Pharaoh aside. But the point is that God will do these things, because what's more glorious than the chosen people coming back to Israel, within which, in the nation of Israel, okay, the Savior of the world is going to be born. There's no greater good in human history than the incarnation and then the subsequent passion, death, and resurrection of Christ. The problem is the modern sensibilities, and Joe, unfortunately, even in some Christian circles, they can't wrap their heads around that. They really can't. We have prosperity gospels now. When did Jesus ever say you were going to get rich?
No,
I
I
told you
know.
this. No, I told you the story before on the show. I swear, I heard this from in my own ears. Dude said the day after I said I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, I had a $40,000 Corvette in my driveway and I had a Rolex on my wrist. I heard that. That's the perversion we're living in right now.
Well, that's part of it. I mean, again, it's the long game, and I've seen in my own life the decades of walking with God how the tortoise always wins the race. Remember that Bugs Bunny commercial? He always does. God plays the long game. And people sometimes, like the country itself, they appear to be winning, but it's their winning that will be their undoing. It's like a father that sees his 16-year-old son who's having sex, who's doing drugs and drinking heavily. He knows that relationship's going nowhere. He knows that type of behavior is going to lead to trouble. And he also knows that he continues to talk to his son and his son ignores him. It's not a question of if, it's a matter of when the bottom comes. It's the same thing what's happening to America. And eventually it will bottom out. And when it bottoms out from the ashes, Cardinal George echoed it. I mean, you can go through many people who are brilliant people,
Absolutely.
holy people, and they say from the ashes, the church will build again. And that's what's going to ultimately happen in America. Now, how that is
Plays
formed,
out. Right.
I don't know, but God does, because he doesn't abandon you. He never abandons you. Even the worst person. There's a saying, I referenced him a couple weeks ago. His name's Jacques Fresh. He was a murderer he's actually a servant of God in France. And he went to prison and he was executed. He had a massive conversion in jail. He was a murderer. And I mean, he reads how I know, because he was the meditation today in the Magnificat. And even him, God didn't abandon him. He was a murderer. You see, people, though, it's sad. Most people learn through suffering. They don't listen. It's like the prodigal son. And that's like what America is going through right now. They don't want to listen to very common sense, like, ideas.
But Joe,
it's not.
Let me ask you a question. There's two kinds of people, though. There's two that when the chastisement comes, you're going to have one group of people that are going to curse God because of the chastisement. Again, because they're children and they think, and they don't think in a mature way. And we pray for them, of course, okay? But also when the chastisement comes, there's a lot of people that will be woken in a real authentic way, not in the current context of the word woke. You know what I'm trying to say. They will wake up and they'll understand that their chastisement was deserved. See, that's the difference between the Catholic Church and Protestants, Jews, Muslims. Okay. In other words, the Catholic Church is very clear. And this is something that people need to hammer home and push back on people when it comes to. We have free will, but so does God. He has a divine will. We have free will. Remember when we talked to E. Michael Jones, he was talking about Martin Luther? The Catholic worldview is the proper worldview. I chose to sin against you, Lord. Like the prodigal son, going back to the prodigal son. When the prodigal son returns home, what does he say to the father? Father, I have sinned against heaven and you. Okay? He accepts the responsibility for his actions. He accepts the consequences, but because his father is loving, as God is loving, all right, he does not punish him, okay? He probably figured he was punished enough in the dark place, okay? And he brings him into the house and they have a party. On the other hand, you have people that are going to say they don't want the chastisement. I just want to do what I want. But unfortunately, those people, Joe, in my opinion, they're the ones ruling the roost right now.
Oh, there's no doubt.
They're the ones ruling the world right now.
But ultimately, they, like I said, they'll be further in the minority, because after a while, again, when things get very dark, I mean, things are dark now, but I mean, it could get a million times darker. And there are countries where it is like that. People live in misery and in squalor. Listen, it will take time, and it's about the long game. Like I see that. I've seen that with people who, to be honest with you, criticized me early on when I made changes in my life. And I watched the arc of life over decades. My ways proved out. I'm telling you, Joe. And it's not the sprinter that wins. It's the marathon runner that
Right.
wins. You're like, the formula that God lays out is the winning formula.
Yes, right.
All you have to do is stay faithful to it. I tell my wife this all the time. We're on the road. All we have to do is stay on it.
Right.
Straight ahead. Walk straight ahead.
Joe, let's take a quick break. You're listening to the Crusade Channel, your home for the Mike Church Show, Crusade Channel News, the Barrett Brief, and the Kennedy Profession. From sun up to sundown, the Crusade Channel is the last live radio station standing. Stick around. We're coming right back. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo and Joe Rossinello, and we are way in the breach on the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Remember the chat room, crusadechannel.com/chat. That is the only social media out there worth actually socializing in. And please follow Joe and I wherever you find us on social media, Facebook, YouTube, until they shut us down, of course. But we are there, and Rumble, and we're trying some other things. But please, wherever you find us, click a like, subscribe, share, help us out in any way you can. And of course, we're always appreciative of your prayers. Joe, let's sum up and I want your comments on this, and then we'll move on. I want your comments. Thomas, in this article, Star Parker points out Thomas' message about the Declaration may be summarized. There are eternal truths, the truth for all of humanity, and it is the personal responsibility of each individual to live up to them. Thomas's detractors are those who reject these premises. This defines the culture war that so deeply and dangerously divides America today. Joe, I love your comments on that.
Well, there's no question about it. And all I would say is this. I actually think and this is a great, I think, tie-in to Austin Roos's argument, because I love his attitude. He's so positive. It's almost like a phantom. Like, clearly these people reject, the founders. They reject the brilliance of these documents, and they reject Clarence Thomas. But once again, it's the long game, Joe. We will outlast them. The church has outlasted all its detractors. And frankly, we will outlast these people because they will destroy themselves. It's just a fact. And again, I've seen this in the arc of my own life. Like, it is about the long game.
Mm-hmm.
And it will collapse underneath its own weight.
I think what's important about what you're saying, Joe, which really I just want to end this conversation on, because I think it's to hammer it home. Some may say, well, then why are you doing what you're doing? We should just worry about the end times and just let the Lord take care of it. And I say no. Michael's in the chat room. He said, millions of people are waiting for the warning. Michael, with all due respect to you, warning? The warnings have been there for 2,000 years, okay? The attempted destruction of the church by the Roman emperors, okay? People like Martin Luther, who came along later on, okay, and started his own religion, okay? The modern atheists, okay, the Marxists and everything else. What warnings do we need? The warnings are all in Scripture, okay? We're here not because we think that Christ is going to lose. We're here because we're trying to evangelize other people.
Oh, save people.
We're here because, number one, as St. James said, when you bring one soul to the church, it covers a multitude of your own sins. And the Lord knows I have a multitude of sins, okay? And I want to do what he tells me to do, as Our Lady said at the wedding feast of Cana, okay? We're here because we don't want souls to be lost. We flip to the end of the book, Michael. We already know that Christ wins the war. He is the victor. We pray to Our Lady of Victory, okay? We know that we know what the outcome is. that doesn't mean that you have a guaranteed outcome, or I have a guaranteed outcome, or Joe has a guaranteed outcome. We need to fight for souls. That's why we're here. That's why we're fighting the culture war. We don't want to see souls falling off because they're buying into the lies of the culture and ultimately the devil. So I agree with you, Michael, that warnings are good, but the warnings have been there from the beginning. They came from Christ's own lips. Okay. We always, and St. Peter, it reminds me of St. Peter when he said, be sober, be vigilant, because your enemy, the devil, prowls about the world like a lion seeking to devour souls. Well, we're successors. We're not priests, but we are successors, all right, of those early Christians, of those early Catholics, okay? And we are being sober and vigilant by making sure we spread the truth of the gospel to other people. So I agree with you that warnings are important, but the warnings have always been there. And remember, Christ wins in the end. We're just simply trying to play our part in helping to save souls, including our own.
Absolutely. And it's about being faithful. I mean, like, there are many, if you look also at the lives of the saints, many times they were treated unjustly. It's almost like seeing past the outcome at hand. Like, look at Saint Stephen. Like, he didn't like scream, he didn't shout. Like, God will defend the truth better than you can. Our job is to just do our part, like you said, to bring light to darkness, to reflect God's love in our lives, to basically mirror the life of a disciple in truth, in word, and in deed. But ultimately, the sands of what do they say? The mill of God grinds slow, but it grinds fine. The America, eventually, when it bottoms out, a remnant will come about again, and there will be a renaissance. The idea for now, for us, is to point to Christ, because he's the answer, and to reflect him in our life. And if we do so, to be honest with you, we do what we're asked to do, and God will say when we see him, well done, good and faithful servant. We're not the savior. You see, I think sometimes like we're a political party isn't the savior. An idea isn't the savior. Now, who's the savior, Joe? A person. And that person is Christ. And we work for him. And that's it.
I think it's the greatest message, and we'll move on to the culture war. Austin Roos had some things to say about that. I think it's the greatest thing to remind people of. Stop, please, stop. Yes, politics are important. They affect our everyday lives. Ultimately, the politics should not affect our salvation. We want a better society. We want a good place to bring up our children, our families, everything else. But at the end of the day, Joe, you nailed it, okay? Stop looking for saviors where there is no savior to be found. There is only one, and that's it. And the Renaissance, Joe, by the way, I know this might cheese off a lot of Protestants out there. The Renaissance in America will be a Catholic Renaissance. I firmly believe that. Because, like I said, Protestantism, because on certain levels, is true, but at the end of the day does not possess the fullness of the truth. Only the Catholic Church does. So if America is going to be saved and maybe be that beacon for the world that it should have been, okay, it will be more Catholic. Having said that, Joe, let's move on. I knew we were going to take a long time on the Clarence Thomas
no, it's a good conversation.
And by the way, Clarence Thomas is a great man. And from the rooftops, we need to defend him. He's not just a great justice. He's a great man, okay? He's been an example to a lot of people. And it's disgusting, Joe Resinello, by the way. It's disgusting the way he's been disparaged by the left, all because he doesn't think baby killing is a very good idea, amongst other things. So now you're at the front line with Joe and Joe. We're on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Remember, the chat room is open, crusadechannel.com/chat. Austin Roos in Crisis Magazine, Joe, he asked an interesting question. Are the culture wars over? So I'm going to throw that question over to you, Joe Resinello. Are the culture wars over? Because I
love Austin Roos. We've interviewed him a number of times. He really is. And I love he's so positive. and he's so consistent, and he fights like a wild dog. I love him, to be honest with you. This is what he had to say. He said, many conservatives say the culture wars are over and we have lost. Many people look around our culture and society and see the utter destruction. They see grade schoolers being taught that the gay sex drug prep is just peachy. You know it's Austin Ruse. I never used the word peachy. I just wanted to clarify that. I'm just I just had to say that.
I don't think I've ever used that word.
No, but I had to say, I had to just clarify that. Anyway, they see kids being taught there is this thing called anal sex. 7th graders in my local school system hear this. Kids can access the hardest of hardcore porns on iPhones that they ought not to have. Want to know what we've lost across this land? This is Austin Ruse now again. And this isn't peachy. Consider that as of late, as the 1950s, this is amazing, actually. I didn't know some of this.
When I read this, I thought the same thing. I was like, I didn't know the stats on this. Go ahead.
He said fornication was illegal in at least 38 states. Adultery was illegal in all but 5. Sodomy was illegal in all the states. Even seduction was considered both a tort and a crime. And contraception was forbidden in most places. Each of these laws reflected fundamental aspects of traditional Catholic teaching. Now, at the end of the day, looking at it from this perspective, I mean, particularly, you could take adultery being illegal. God does allow free will. I'm clearly not for adultery. To say it's illegal, one could debate that if you're a legal scholar. But why at the root were these things forbidden? Why? As a state, as a nation? Because people who were in charge understood the fundamental truths that these things lead to nowhere and to trouble. I mean, it's unequivocal.
Joe, Paul VI outlined this in Humane Vitae. Humane Vitae wasn't just a statement on, let's say, don't use contraception, like the big bad Pope sitting there saying, don't use contraception. He outlined this in Humane Vitae, okay? He prophesied what would happen. He said, if we allow this, because contraception, Joe, is more than just the act itself. It's the mentality behind it.
Oh, without a doubt.
If I could just do whatever I want, well, then it just doesn't stop with sex. I could, if I impregnate a woman, I could bring her down to the abortion clinic and kill that baby. You just went from fornication to murder. Okay? Michael Jones points this out all the time. In other words, if you want to talk about pure slavery, look at the sexual revolution in the 1960s. It's pure slavery.
But it's so ingrained. You see, that's the problem. And that's why only God could shake us out of it. You see, when you try, like I could articulate it very well, actually, why contraception is wrong, particularly in a marriage, because it's a selfish act. You're using your wife and she's using you for pleasure. And ultimately that will bleed into other aspects of your marriage. And ultimately selfishness destroys love.
Right.
You see, but the reason why people ignore that statement and those truths is because when you're open to life, you're open to dying to yourself, because when you have a number of children, you have to give up things. You don't have the McMansion. You don't have the 2 fancy cars. You don't go on vacations. Like, your time is not yours. And that's what people refuse to do. You see, the whole idea of marriage is skewed. I see this actually in my neighbors, how they look at me. I mean, I live in a very normal neighborhood, to be honest with you. It's very hardworking people. I live in a normal house. It's not like anything fancy. It's a normal home. But my wife is pregnant with our 5th kid. No one has children like that. And I'm not doing that to wave my flag, but I see how they look at me.
Right.
They're like, you're so odd. You're odd. Why would you do that? That's how the modern world views that. But you see, God uses that model to guide you to himself, because you die to yourself. The model guides itself in ways that you wouldn't go.
Let me ask you a question. Does it strike you, based on what you just said, okay, When the church is weird, like you're describing, I'm saying not weird because I'm calling it weird. I'm saying because the world calls it weird. Does it strike you when you look at the history of the Catholic Church? When the church is at its weirdest, it's at its strongest. And when the church tries to resemble the world too much, that's when it's at its weakest. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's no question. I mean, to be honest with you, I think fundamentally the problem in the American Catholic Church, one of the problems anyway, is we take money from the government. We do a lot of it. And any person who has ever been in business knows no one gives you money for nothing. There's always something to it. That's one of the problems that have occurred in American Catholic universities. You could say, like, Joe and I on our Veritas Catholic Network show, we interview a lot of people, and we've interviewed a number of people from Franciscan University, which is a very, it's not perfect, but it's a good Catholic university. A number of people. And in those conversations, I was telling my wife, all of them, they're Catholic. But as stupid as that sounds, like, they not only work at Franciscan University, they teach at Franciscan University, but they subscribe to the idea of the Catholic lifestyle.
Right.
That's how it should be.
Well, let me ask you a question. If you said to your neighbors, you talk about your neighbors all the time, okay? And if you said to your neighbors, well, I'm Catholic, okay? And let's say you did contracept, and let's say you told your neighbors, yeah, my wife and I, we're careful, we take precautions. That's why we have 2 kids instead of you're about to have your 5th. Then what makes you different than the rest of the world? See, my thing is this: if I say I'm Catholic, it's because I'm saying I'm different. I'm different. I think differently. I try imperfectly. And heaven knows that I want to act differently. Father Lewis always used to tell us, we're Catholic, we're countercultural. Christ was countercultural. We are countercultural. What would make you different if you had a conversation, Joe Rossinello, with one of your neighbors? And you say, yeah, my wife and I contracept. That's why we're planning on having 2 kids, rather than have your neighbors seeing you about to pop out your 5th. There's nothing different about it. There's nothing inspiring about it. What would inspire your neighbors to become Catholic if you were just like everybody else? Nothing.
Well, I don't think they've just bought the lie. I mean, America as a whole bought the lie. And frankly, even in the model of following the Catholic model, I mean, we stumble. Like, it's not to die to self. That's the path to heaven. Is to die to self. And that's really hard. And the married model helps you to do it. But getting back to money, like, Catholic schools have been bought because secular people are on their board and they influence. See, that's part of the way the world has gotten in to the door of the church, through worldly influence, money. And if you look at orders that are sound, they don't allow that. They rely on the providence of God. That can apply to you too as well. If you trust in God, you got to get out of the boat. But getting back to, like, America here that basically Roos is talking about, he's basically saying that there were laws in place that basically protected you against yourself. Those laws aren't in place anymore. People have bought into the lie, and it's bore bad fruit. You see, I hearken back to that constantly on the show. How's it working for you?
Right.
Oh, I've been married for 20 years. Yeah, but you hate your wife. How many people I work with, all they do is work because they don't want to go home.
What about Tim Gordon? Recently we interviewed Tim Gordon. He said the same thing. He goes, you got fathers that on the weekends, rather than spending time with it. Well, first of all, during the week when they come home, the first thing they do is crack a beer, rather than maybe crack a beer later on before you go to sleep, maybe a half hour if you want to watch some news, but spend time with your son or your daughter doing homework. Okay. And how many fathers, they look for hobbies on the weekends because they don't want to spend time with their kids or their wives, like motorcycle clubs and things like that. Now, I know people in motorcycle clubs. There's nothing wrong with it. Okay. But the priority is what you're doing for your family. We say all the time that, okay, and again, Joe, I don't say this in a cheeky way. I say it in a very serious way. I struggle in life, okay? For a very long time, I lived only for myself. It's not easy to break out of that. Now, believe me when I tell you, my wife makes sure that I don't just live for myself. And now I have a foster son that I hope is going to become my son. So I'm learning how to not just live for myself. And I have learned that since I got married, because men should get married to good women, and you start to learn that you don't live for yourself. But that's the mentality that's out there, Joe. How many fathers work 80 hours a week, but then on the weekends, they don't want to go to the kids' basketball game on Saturday morning. They're looking to get away from their families and their wives. That's a very big shame right there.
Again, it's the buying, it's buying into selfishness. And Roos kind of continues on that same line. This is what he says. He says, what has replaced these fundamental Christian teachings? The teachings of a new faith, a new established church. After all, where kids once prayed and read the Bible, they are now forced to recite proper pronouns and to believe that kids can be born into the wrong body. The pelvic left laughs at us when we say there's a culture war going on. They say we are paranoid conspiracy mongers. This is nothing less than gaslighting by those holding the whip hand. Make no mistake, the culture war is real. It is a war of aggression by the progressive left against the Christian people. For our part, it is a defensive war, and therefore it is not only a just war, but it's mandatory that we fight. Now, he's not saying physically fight, but do things like this. Go to school boards. You're starting to see it. And for people who say you're crazy, this isn't a war against Christians. Listen, look at what's going on in the public schools. You are shoving down the throat of many kids who are Jewish and who are Christian, particularly Catholic, who don't believe these things.
Joe, let's take a quick break. We're going to come right back. I want you to pick up on that right there. You're listening to the Crusade Channel. You're home for the Mike Church Show, Crusade Channel News, the Barrett Brief, and the Kennedy Profession from sun up to sundown. The Crusade Channel is the last live radio station standing. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello. We're way in the breach on the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. We always emphasize to everybody who hears our voice, whether on the Crusade Channel or on our social media, you need to become a premium member of the Crusade Channel. You have access to all of the station's content. You got Mike Church, you got Rick Barrett, you got Kennedy Hall, you have a Frontline with Joe and Joe. It's a cause. It's not a radio station. It's a cause. We need to get behind it. We emphasize doing that. So Joe Resinello, I cut you off, but I do want to say this. I know, Joe, this is not going to come across to a number of people maybe too well. This is not a war on Christianity, and it's not a war on Judaism. It's a war on the Catholic faith. It's a war on the Catholic Church, because there are too many. See, Protestantism to me, Joe, is too watered down. It's too subjective. It's too primacy of conscience rather than deferring to God's law, okay? There is no primacy of conscience. And some Catholics say that too, unfortunately. We have some bishops who say that, okay? This is a war on the Catholic Church. Because, Joe, let's face it, if you had a Christian church that had a lesbian bishop, the left is not going to attack that church. This is an attack on the Catholic faith. 2,000 years of Catholic teaching. Now, I'd like to know what you're thinking, what you think about that, and whether or not you disagree with me.
Well, I mean, primarily, I would say, because to be honest with you, our teachings, I think, are the clearest on particularly many of the social issues. Sadly, within the Catholic Church itself, there are many that have watered down beliefs and almost make it like sound, if you believe what the church teaches, you're a crazy person.
Right.
But I mean, again, I don't make it up. I always say that. I mean, I simply don't make it up. I just read it, and you either believe it or you don't.
I think that's an important distinction to be made, is that yes, you either believe it or you don't. You're not forced to. Even God respects your free will. You're not forced to, but if you believe it, then you actually have to strive to live it.
Absolutely. But also, like, circling back to the war against us, I mean, they're shoving it down your throat. I mean, I find it laughable when, you know, like, politically speaking, when a conservative idea is put forth, and we're about to see one. Dobbs versus Mississippi, woman's like clinic in Mississippi. I believe the Supreme Court's going to begin arguments December 1st. There are many people. I invite our listeners out there to read First Things. It's the October issue. Roe Must Fall. It's a symposium. A number of scholars wrote some articles. I benefited from the read. Robert George, being one of them from Princeton, actually believes Roe is going to be overturned and abortion is going to be put back to the states as a result of Dobbs, simply because Roe is poorly, it stands poorly, like, from a legal perspective, purely from a legal perspective. He believes it's going to get overturned. Interesting. I personally don't take that position. I hope he's right. Let me just phrase it that way. Anyway, if that happens, and this is why I bring this up, the outrage. You see, why is the country okay with public education telling my children that marriage can also be between two men? That's an outrage to me because I'm a Catholic. I'm a Catholic. And it's a public education. Think about this linearly for a moment. It's a public education, and I pay taxes too. So how about we do this? We don't talk about it. How's that for a compromise? We don't talk about it. Leave that to your parents.
But that's not, but that counters
But this
what
is why
you
it's a
said.
war, Joe. That's
Right.
why I'm only bringing it up. This is why it's a war, and that's why Austin Ruse is right. You see, it's okay to do that. But when the Supreme Court, which is about to rule on Dobbs, makes a decision that basically says, could make the decision that this is not a constitutional, like, decision, Roe, 1973, nor was Dred Scott. Mind you, slavery was legal. So was segregation. Was it right? No. No. So the Supreme Court got that wrong. They got this one wrong too. And Robert George, who went to Harvard and Oxford, believes that that's what's going to happen. Why do I bring this up? All of a sudden, we're shoving our faith down your throat. No, we're not. It's a basic truth. It's a basic truth. Why are you shoving your faith down my throat, my children's throat? That's perfectly okay.
Right.
And the funny part about it is they could care less. And they're the ones that supposedly are so enlightened and open-minded, but they could care less. And I find that to be laughable, actually, because they can't step back, or they won't step back to say it, or to even have the discussion. And it's wrong, because, again, I'll compromise with you. Listen, if you want to live that way, that's your business. And here's another thing. I won't discriminate against you. I will hire you. I will respect you, and I will treat you like I treat every other person that I deal with in life. However, stay in your lane, and I'll stay in mine. If you want to have a discussion on it, I'm happy to engage you in a loving and respectful manner. However, stay in your lane, particularly in the public square. And that's not what's happening. And people could care less.
Right.
And that's the truth. And that's why it's a culture war. And they know it.
No. What we know, look, first of all, we've said on the show before, I brought up the example of the movie The Killing Fields, when all the little kids are in the re-education camp, and the communist operative hands the chalk to a little kid who walks over to the chalkboard where there's stick figures of obviously a man and a woman, okay, and a little child. So it's the two man and the woman stick figure and the little child stick figure. And the communist operative hands the chalk to the little kid, and the little kid puts a big X through the parents. This is communism. This is Marxism. It cannot flourish and achieve its ultimate end as long as children are taught by their parents. So what they do is they make it nearly impossible for you to educate your kids anywhere outside of the public school system. And we'll talk about that, and hopefully we'll get to it later on, about parents that are taking their kids out of public school in droves because of things like anal sex and stuff like that. But that is their goal. Remember, even the church teaches, Joe, who's the first school? Who are the first educators of children? Parents, not the church. Parents bring their children to the church to get fully educated. But the first educators of the children are the parents. Okay. Well, the left can't have that, especially if the parents you're talking about are a couple of juices like Joe and Joe, who actually believe in Catholic teaching, who believe in Jesus Christ, who believe in the transcendent, who believe in the good, the true, and the beautiful. We can't have them teaching that to little kids. We need to teach little kids they can be whatever they want. And they're basically valueless. And they're dust, and they're going to go back to dust, and there's no soul, there's no heaven, there's no hell. And for what reason? To bring themselves more and more political power. Why is it that that's conspiracy theory when we know from history, Joe Rossinello, that that's always been their goal? That's why I bring up the killing fields. That's what they did in Cambodia. That's what they did in the Soviet Union. Destroy the family. That's what we're going through in America right now. That's one of the reasons why Joe and Joe are here, because of the attack on the family, not just the attack on the church. We know what they're doing. Moreover, they know we know what they're doing. So when they call us conspiracy mongers, we should just go right back at them. Say, is this conspiracy? Is that conspiracy? Is that conspiracy? Austin Ruse, he's a guy confronts them, Joe, in probably one of the darkest places in the world, which is at the UN. He confronts them there.
But, you know, here's God at work again, playing the long game. Now here comes COVID. Parents had to pull their kids out of public schools. Had to. Many cases. I read a stat, 7% public school education is down, 7% between homeschooling and kids going to private school. During this whole COVID situation, all of last year, my daughter went to school. There was no like homeschool. Like what I mean by that, she went to Catholic school. Mm-hmm. The doors are open. It's collapsing. The COVID provided a window into what's going on. And frankly, a lot of people, we covered stories how now a lot of moms want to stay home. Life has improved for some, not all, but for some with COVID who got to work from home, spend more time with the family. My point is, God will work his way into it. He's going to and has. The public school system is a mess. It's adrift. And you're starting to see the cracks. You're seeing it all over social media. Parents, even in liberal states, are flipping out because they're not okay with this type of stuff. Again, you're waging a war on our children and you're not staying in your lane in a public sphere. How would you like it if I had political power and I mandated in the public school that you had to say the Hail Mary in the public school? If you had a Muslim kid, a Jewish kid, you had to say it. Is that right? God doesn't even do that. God doesn't force himself on you. He proposes to you and you make a choice. So why are you forcing your belief system on my kids?
Right.
And it's not just me either. And this is overt. Frankly, though, people haven't completely woken up to it because some people just don't care.
They're starting to, though. You're right about that.
They are. It's the beginning. It's the beginning. They don't see the danger. Once again, I'll say it again. How's it working for you? Look around you. I say this to my brother sometimes. Don't listen to what people say. Watch what they do. Watch what they do. And I say that because look at the outcome of people's lives and follow models that work. That's what case studies are in business school. Ask people who are successful what they did to become successful and model it. Well, it's the same thing with people's lives. Look at those who have successful lives. And I'm not talking necessarily about money. I'm talking about people who have fruitful and happy marriages, who have children, who have happy and joyful lives. Look what they do and watch it carefully. Don't listen to what people say. Watch what they do. And that's what I invite you to do with people who've bought into this bull crap. If you don't want to listen to me, look at the fruit of their lives. Look at, are they happy? Are their lives successful? Do they have successful marriages? I mean, let's be real.
Well, Joe,
I have eyes.
But one of the reasons why we're having this conversation, we have all of our conversations, because people don't want to get real. People don't want to examine their own lives. Unfortunately, Joe, people do measure success by their bank book. Well, I got $1 million in the bank, so I must have been successful. Yeah, but your kids are a mess. Who's on drugs? Who's gay? Who's lesbian? Who's what? Your son thinks he's a girl. They'll swear they're successful. They'll excuse all that because they got money in the bank and they think they're wildly successful. Joe, I want to address something, because and I won't spend too much time on it. One of our friends in the chat room, Kat, she was asking about primacy of conscience and why the church does not teach that. Now, I've heard two prominent, well, let me take back the word prominent. I've heard one prominent Catholic, Blaise Supich, talk up primacy of conscience. And a guy who I don't want to condemn, I don't want to be a judgmental guy. And I've always liked him as an actor, Martin Sheen, who mistakenly said in an interview, my church teaches, now he's Catholic, my church teaches primacy of conscience. Primacy of conscience is a lie. Okay. The idea that because you've weighed something in your conscience and then you acted on what you concluded, and that therefore necessarily says that that's not an evil thing, that's a lie. Your conscience, if not formed to the law of God, to the will of God, if your conscience is not properly formed, okay, then it is not prime. Because people could do all sorts of terrible things, Joe Resinello, after having weighed it in their conscience. An 18-year-old girl could come up with 10 reasons why she'll have an abortion and say, well, I weighed it in my conscience, but that doesn't make the action any less evil because she weighed it in her conscience. So I just wanted to mention that because Kat asked about it, said, what is primacy of conscience? It's a lie, is what it is. God's law is what is prime, not your conscience. And if your conscience is not conformed to God's law, your conscience needs to get conformed to God's law.
I think a better way, like, because I agree with you, but someone could say is like, who's your God versus my God? What I would say is, how I would explain it is, you could be sincere and still be wrong. Like many people in history and in life were very sincere in what they did, but they were wrong. Like historically speaking, not because I said they were wrong, the outcome was wrong. Che Guevara believed what he did. He was a murderer. He killed people arbitrarily. If you did not believe in his line of thinking, he killed you. He killed you. He was wrong. Like, just to use an example, one example of many, we could list many. That's why that is wrong. But ultimately, getting back to the culture war, it is war. And sadly, we are losing. It's just a fact. But once again, what I know to be true, we will out-endure you. The Catholic Church has out-endured all her enemies. So rest easy, guys out there. I'm not saying don't fight. You have to fight. You have to pray. You have to speak. You have to speak the truth and educate, but do it in a manner of a calm and have peace, and don't lose your joy, because ultimately we will out-endure you. There's no question in my mind.
I think you're right about that. That's one of the biggest traps we could fall into, is allowing them to take our joy, because even though things are atrocious, and they are, okay, and there's ample reason to not be joyful. Okay. You're right. I want to tell you, tell the audience, Joe Resinello at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Austin Ruse, we've interviewed him, like you said, a couple times. He's a happy guy.
Oh, no doubt. I like him.
I love
I
him to death.
sincerely do. And he's very
He's
generous with his time.
He's generous with his time. He's good humored. He's good natured. He's got a joy about him because he's a faithful Catholic. He said, basically, I have written about these atrocities for the last 25 years. What's more, I have acted. My group has played a key role in stopping the pelvic left at the UN. They want a global right to an abortion. We've stopped them. They want to redefine the family. We've stopped them. They want sexual revolution and gender identity as a new category of non-discrimination in international law. And we've stopped them. We've gone up against all the powers of the earth, and we've stopped them. Joe, if you want to go into the quote unquote belly of the beast, go try to do some of this stuff at the UN where all the oligarchs are operating. Austin Ruse he's a guy you go out and have a scotch with. That guy's a joyful guy, faithful Catholic. He's fighting right up against Satan at the UN because they want to make all this stuff international law. Okay. They want to make it a human rights abuse for you to say that a boy cannot be a girl and a girl cannot be a boy. He's fighting that fight. Why? Because he recognizes no, the culture war is not over. It is alive. Okay. It's going on around you. We're fighting in the culture war by what we're doing. He's fighting at the UN. King Dude and Barrett and the rest of them, Kennedy Hall, all these guys, the Crusade Channel, they're all fighting in the culture war. Why? Because it's not going away. We're fighting for the good, the true, and the beautiful. That fight has been around since the garden.
I'm glad you said that. It's always been here, and it always will be until Christ comes back. Austin Ruse says that in the article as well, until he returns. But Christ says, when I come back, who will I find faith on the earth? I mean, It comes down to that. We just have to do our part. Do your part, but do it in a peaceful manner. You're not the savior. I'm not the savior. Christ is. A person is. We just work for him. Ground yourself in prayer and in fasting. Do what you have to do to build yourself up, because that's building yourself up for this fight. God will use you and the gifts he gave you to contribute to the good, the true, and the beautiful in the way that you can. Everyone can't do everything. I do this, but I can't do other things. Like, I don't write books. There are people who write books. We do this. You could do something else. We all have something to do. And we do that by building ourselves up like an athlete. How do we do that? We have a prayer life. We fast. We have a sacramental life. And in that, we are strong in Christ. And he put on the armor of God. That's how you do it. And then you do what God made you do. And frankly, that's it. Other than that, the fight will always be here. It's not about me. It's not about my ego. It's not about me winning an argument. It's not about any of it. It's about just doing what God asked me to do. He asks you to do the same thing in the way that you were made. We're both different, but we both have something to do. That's it.
Right.
And then, and frankly, that's what every baptized Catholic should be doing.
Can I chime in on that?
And that's why we do what we do. We're here to encourage you. That's another thing Joe and I do. We try to inspire you and try to encourage you. Get out there, do what you have to do.
One thing that bothers me in Catholic circles, Joe, is like sometimes, and I'm not going to name names, but it does bother me somewhat, is when some Catholics, who I probably would agree with on everything, okay, but I don't like when they make it seem as though, well, if you're not doing what I'm doing, you're doing something wrong. No, St. Paul said not everybody could preach, not everybody could prophesy, not everybody could teach. Everybody's got a gift from God. We're doing our thing. You're doing your thing. That King Dude's doing his thing. Barrett's doing his thing. Kennedy Hall's doing his thing. Okay. But we're all fighting the same fight. Just because I'm not doing things exactly the way you're doing them, well, that's not my thing. That's your thing. Do it. I'm encouraging you to do it. But leave us alone because we're taking a different tack. And even Paul teaches that. Okay. In other words, we're not always going to be talking about the same thing, but if we come together, okay, in other words, doing our thing, then we'll be one more unified voice, okay? Each individual voice, but then unified. And it's a problem I have sometimes with some conservative Catholics, Joe. Well, if you're not saying this, then you're doing something wrong. No, well, you're saying it. Go ahead, continue to say it. I agree with you. But why do I have to? I'm talking about somehow. The audience needs to hear about everything that's going on. You're doing your thing. We're doing our thing. If you're telling the truth and speaking the truth, I'm supporting you. And if we're doing the same things, preaching the truth, well, then you need to support us. I don't like that in Catholic circles, Joe, when some people try to make it seem as though if you're not doing exactly what they're doing, and if you're not talking about the same topics that they're talking about, then you're not doing your job. That bothers me beyond belief. I'll be honest.
Well, it does. I mean, you just can't get into it. Like, because again, it's not about me. Like, I don't do this for me. Like Father Lewis asked us to do it. And frankly, I honestly believe, like, Joe, we're different, but we're the same. And God brought us together through Father Lewis, and we're doing what we were asked to do, and we're going to do it.
Right.
Because that's it. And you know, like, it's not about when people, when the you part gets involved, that's when everything gets messed up.
Let's take a quick break. Let's take a quick break. You're listening to the Crusade Channel, your home for the Mike Church Show, Crusade Channel News, the Barrett Brief, and Kennedy Profession from sunup to sundown. The Crusade Channel is the last live radio station standing. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo and Joe Rossinello weigh in the breach on the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Joe, that's my whole thing, is that I get very frustrated, and we've been in that position before where people have tried to press us to, let's say, make a comment about a particular thing that maybe we weren't prepared to, or whatever. I'm not doing what you're doing. If what you're saying is true, then more power to you. But I'm not going to do what you do just because you tell me to. My thing is this: the reason why people listen to us is for the same reason we said from the very beginning. This is kitchen table discussion. That's what we do. We're everyman. We talk like regular guys because we are regular guys, and we talk about the topics we want to talk about. Okay. And if I don't want to talk about a particular topic, then I don't want to talk about it, and nor do you. Why? Because it's not important, because it's not what we are doing. We're focusing on this. Somebody else is focusing on this. And that's a problem, because a lot of people sow division that way. And I just, quite frankly, the last thing we need, because that's all the devil is about, is dividing. As a Catholic community, particularly in America, Joe, we cannot afford to let the devil divide us. And it happens.
No, I would agree 100%. And that's where, again, to be grounded in truth, grounded in our faith, and live a sacramental life. And God, like with the theme of the show, is the compass. He guides us, guides all of us. I mean, it's the seeds of baptism. And it doesn't just apply to us. It's to everybody. We all have something to do.
Right.
I think we should talk about the Paul Krauss article, Joe, because I think it's important regarding Catholic education. I really like this article.
Well, we're talking about, obviously, we just mentioned primacy of conscience. Well, that obviously entails how one is formed. Now, conscience is important. I'm not trying to suggest, Joe Rossinello, that conscience is not important. Of course it is. But conscience is only the means by which God gives us the authentic ability to know what's right and to know what's wrong, and then to make a choice. But if you have a skewed conscience, then you quite frankly don't know what's right and know what's wrong. Now, central to this, in the formation of your conscience, is Catholic education.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think it's undeniable too. I've been involved in Catholic education for some time in different capacities in the church. I mean, we're not a well catechized church. That's why I said, like, this war, we're seeing the fruit of decades of bad behavior on many, many fronts. But ultimately, you can't do what you don't know. A lot of people don't know what the church teaches. They just simply don't know. I mean, right. I'll give you a perfect example of that. Like, I was talking to my brother today, talking about church. and he'd said something along the lines, my brother isn't a practicing Catholic and did not go to Catholic school. I did. He went to public school straight through. And he made a statement along the lines of, well, this person does go to church, but they don't go to mass on Sunday. Now, I'm just bringing this up as an example of that's a lack of catechesis. You have to go to church on Sunday. In fact, this is the teaching of the church. This is not Joe Resinello's statement. It's teaching of the church. If you miss mass on Sunday and you're not sick or you're taking care of someone who's sick, it's a mortal sin. That's a teaching of the church. That's not my teaching. It's a teaching of the church. And just because no one says it doesn't take it away.
Right.
But people don't know what the church teaches because, frankly, and there's many reasons. It's problems because of the family, problems because of the church. There's a million reasons why. But Paul Krauss breaks this down. He says, what is the purpose of Catholic education? He said, as Catholics, this is a question we should always be asking and be concerned with. Catholics are supposed to be a separated people, a people elect and married to God through Jesus Christ. Catholic education, therefore, is an extension of our ecclesiastical theology, is equally meant to be a unique thing in the world, separate and distinct from the winds of modern Babylon. The long tradition of Catholic humanities and theologies coming together, that distinct Catholic universities with a uniqueness, is now being eroded in the push for social relevance. A social relevance that would take Catholic education in the exact opposite direction of its theological commitments and identity. We've blended in with the culture. Catholics are no different than the culture, and that's a problem. We're supposed to be in the world, though. You see, we're not to hide. And the example of that is the transfiguration. Christ brings Peter, John, and James up the mountain. He reveals himself to them, but then they have to come down. And when they come down, why did he do that? Because they had something important to do.
Right.
Well, we have the same important things, different, but important. And that simply means that we have to live differently, but we're amongst the people. We have to model a way, Christ's way, and people will see this, and in seeing it, they will live differently because they see the efficaciousness of your life. You see, that's what a saint is. What is a saint? It's an example. And that's why we're supposed to be in the world. And here's another thing. That includes suffering. John Hardin, who's a servant of God, a very good Jesuit, I actually knew a priest who was brought back to the priesthood because of John Hardin, said this. He said we are to speak the truth, live the truth, teach the truth, and this is what the part that we're reluctant to do, and to suffer for the truth. You see, most likely we're not going to win. Jesus kind of lost in a worldly manner. He was killed, but he won, obviously. But he lost from a worldly perspective. Our lives are not going to always be rosy. But through it, we will witness to something greater than the loss and the sacrifice. You see, that's the part that rubs people the wrong way. I will not forget about even speaking it. I mean, people don't even go there. Forget about the suffering part. Suffering part is included in that. John Hardin is perfectly spot on in that statement. We are to suffer for the truth in the world where God put you. He put you in the world. I am here to live the faith. I'm not here to go along. I'm not here to get rich. I mean, if I get rich, then I have responsibility. And then I have to do something with that money if that is what God's will is for me. But if most likely that's not. But my point is, that's what a Catholic is. And we learn that in education.
Right.
And sadly, Catholic education, it's just about breeding people to be successful.
The good thing is
worldly perspective.
Right. No, you're right. And the thing about when you think about like I went to Seton Hall Prep. Okay. I think about my education. I think about let's say what you're exposed to in an authentic Catholic education. Okay. And aside from the discipline and the the regimented nature of your day and all that, which are all important, because when you're a 13, 14-year-old boy going to high school, obviously you need discipline and you need to be regimented. We wore uniforms. Just as far as the education itself, Joe, we were exposed to everything because that's what Catholic education does. Catholic education sees God in everything. Catholic education is all encompassing. Catholic education emphasized the good, the true, and the beautiful in literature and art, not just theology, in the sciences, okay, which we had to take science. You went to QP. You had to do the same thing, okay? Freshman year, I'm reading The Merchant of Venice, okay? I'm taking Introduction to Science, okay? I'm taking algebra. No, I'm being exposed to all these things because in all these areas of study, you find the good, the true, and the beautiful, okay? And that's what Catholic education does. Juxtapose that, Joe, with public education. See, Catholics, this is one of the things I would emphasize to all our Protestant brothers and sisters, all the Jews out there, the Muslims out there. The Catholic Church is not afraid of any idea that anybody has. None whatsoever. Catholic Church is not afraid of anything that the world offers. The Catholic Church, again, is the church that explores and presents the fullness of the good, the true, and the beautiful. That's why Catholic education, even what you would call not the greatest Catholic schools, okay, are still better education than the public schools. Why do I say that? Because when you juxtapose what you learn in a Catholic school with the public school, the Catholic school exposes you to everything, okay, and is able to teach you all those subjects. What do they do in the public schools? They don't teach you the fullness of these classes. Joe, they want to try to make math politically correct, if you can imagine that, in the public schools. That's not a joke, by the way. Okay.
Well, I mean,
my point, and then I'll let you have it. The restrictions don't come in the Catholic schools where they say, well, we're not going to teach you this. We're not going to teach you that. The restrictions on what you're going to be taught do not come from the Catholic education. That comes from the public education establishment, because they're the ones that are afraid, obviously now in the modern times particularly, they're the ones that are afraid of teaching the fullness of the truth because they wouldn't get a damn follower, not one.
Well, I mean, a couple things. I'm a very big advocate of Catholic education. First and foremost, we don't know who we are if we don't know who God is, because we come from God. People who don't know God, they don't know who they are. And it reflects in their life. Their life is like a boat on the sea, and it's just adrift. They don't know who they are. That's number one. As a human, we don't know how, like, life, Christ gave meaning to life. Because here's the thing, we can't heal ourselves. The world is consistently and always trying to heal itself. We're born with a mortal wound. That wound is sin. God gave us baptism. We're healed of original sin, but then we have concupiscence, which is the tendency to sin, and then God gave us the sacrament of reconciliation. Outside of the Catholic worldview, the world has no answer to those things. We don't know who we are unless we know God. And frankly, if we don't know God through the Catholic vein, frankly, to be honest with you, and these are the words of Jesus Christ, he says, if you do not eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life within you. Jesus said that. So that's the first thing. Mm-hmm. Catholic education teaches us who we are. Secondly, why I think it's a fantastic education, it educates the whole person. You see, I've worked with people. I'll use the example of the University of Pennsylvania. I've worked with people who have gone to the University of Pennsylvania. That school that I have seen with my own eyes, the people that I have known, all they care about that I've seen is success, worldly success. There's much more to life than that. You see, a Catholic education teaches the whole person. Like, for instance, where I went to college, the University of Scranton, I didn't get a lot of the theology. It was there, to be honest with you. If I truly, there were people who did. I know a couple CFRs that went to the University of Scranton. I also know people in my class that became priests. However, what it did teach you is you had to be a person for others. Now, does that save you outside of the church? No. But what it does do, there's something to that too, is all I'm saying, is it teaches you a wholeness that, say, learning pure physics at, say, an Ivy League school does not.
Right.
We are like, and that's why I believe it's the best education. It's the best education. There's no question in my mind, even intellectually speaking. And some of the most brilliant scholars the world has ever known have been produced by the Catholic Church.
Oh, Joe, I was going to say well, first of all, the smartest, well, and because he was God and man, the smartest guy ever to come into the world was Jesus Christ. I think the second smartest guy was St. Thomas Aquinas. Okay. And Aquinas commented on everything. Everything. Okay. You think the Dominicans are afraid of let's say of doing science because it's going to prove science? If you pursue science, it's going to prove evolution is true. Evolution's a lie. We know it's a lie. But having said that, okay, we're not afraid of science. The Catholic Church gave Western civilization science. Okay, the Catholic Church is the one who supported the arts. The problem is, here's something I'd like for you to speak on, Joe. The problem is the Catholic Church says their standards, okay, take art, for example. The Catholic Church supported the arts, but when arts had standards, because the church has a different definition of art than certainly this modern garbage that we see. Modern art says just come up with it in your head, put a urinal against the wall and we'll put that in the Metropolitan Museum of Art and we'll call it a great work of art. Or Jackson Pollock just letting paint drip on a canvas, and that's art. Okay, it's something, but you're not going to tell me that Jackson Pollock is anywhere near the artist of a Michelangelo or a Raphael or a Caravaggio. Okay, art has standards. I'm just using that as an example. The church teaches that, in all these areas, there are standards. There's a way of viewing these things. Modern education is antithetical to that, because in modern education, there are no standards. There's none whatsoever. Like I said, just using art as an example. If you crap on the floor and you call yourself an artist and you take that pile of dung and you take it down to a gallery in Soho in New York, you could sell it probably for $1 million because you're calling it art. You know what I'm trying to say?
No, absolutely. I mean, but ultimately what a Catholic education does is it teaches you that you're living for eternity. You see, because ultimately, and we've said this on other shows, if you don't go, first of all, not everyone goes to heaven, guys. This is another teaching of the church. Jesus said this. I didn't. Not everybody. Good guys, quote unquote, based on the world's idea of good, don't necessarily go to heaven. God said that, not me. So please don't get mad at me. So what I am saying is this, though. It teaches you that there's something more to life than just this. You see, it plants a seed in you. And I'll tell you another thing that I've noticed with people, because I have 3 kids right now in a Catholic system in my town. Parents, at least in New Jersey, who send their kids to Catholic school. Now, are they perfect, the school? No. And are the kids that go there perfect? No. Because I got news for you. I went to Catholic high school, and believe me, I wasn't perfect. I still am not perfect. I was far from perfect, and nor were my friends. But what I have seen, because I've gone to public school too, is this. Parents in New Jersey pay a lot of taxes to live here. And the model that most people in New Jersey follow is this, because I work with people like this. They buy into a town. What do I mean by buy into a town? The public school system is rated very high. Now, what makes it rated high? The standardized testing average is very high. And that's undebatable. Forget about all the other stuff that goes on in here, because most parents, sadly, all they care about is their kid getting into a good school. And in order to get into a good school, you got to get high SAT scores. Well, many school districts in New Jersey have very high averages with SATs. Undebatable. It's undebatable. and people buy into those towns. What I have seen is this: parents who also live in those towns that have high average SAT scores and still pay money to go to Catholic schools understand the meaning of sacrifice. It's not only a different kid, it's a different parent, because many parents won't do it. They're like, listen, I'm paying XYZ in taxes. That's why we live here. You're going to the public school. That bleeds into other areas of their life, into their marriage, how they treat their kids. It's a different kid and it's a different parent. And you're teaching them something that's very important: the word sacrifice. Because in order to bring your kid to that place, as you've said, Joe, many times, your father said, I could drive a Cadillac, but instead I send you to Seton Hall Prep. That bleeds into other areas of life, in the marriage and in the way you treat your kids.
It was Joe. I did not get the lessons I was supposed to. I was a hooligan in a lot of ways, but I will tell you this: the word I heard more than any other word in my 4 years at Seton Hall Prep, from the administrators, from the teachers, and everything else, your parents sacrifice much to send you here. They sacrifice. Believe me when I tell you, Joe, I have a inclination towards at least trying. Again, neither one of us are perfect. I try to put the needs of others first. Okay. I'm very selfish in a lot of ways. I'm not going to deny that. I do. But if I have that in me, it was because of that Catholic education, not just the fact that we read Shakespeare and we had science and we had math and we had things that the public schools just, don't place importance on, not in a meaningful way like the Catholic education does. But I heard from everybody for 4 years about sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice. That stuff stays with you.
Oh, no doubt about that.
Stays with you, because ultimately, if you're going to live a Catholic life, if you can't get that word right, then you're really missing the whole point of the incarnation.
Joe, I'll be honest with you. If you don't understand sacrifice, you're not even going to get anywhere in a worldly perspective. Life, anything worth doing in life requires sacrifice.
Joe,
Forget about it.
Let's take a quick break. We're going to come right back to that. You're listening to the Crusade Channel. You're home for the Mike Church Show, Crusade Channel News, the Barrett Brief, and the Kennedy Professor. From sun up to sundown, the Crusade Channel is the last live radio station standing. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello, way in the breach on the Crusade Channel. Always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. So, Joe, let's stay there for a second. If you're going to get an authentic Catholic education, and again, I'm repeating myself, but I want to bring it back to you for a second. If you don't understand, you see, the church in a Catholic school, they're teaching you about Jesus Christ and his ultimate sacrifice on the cross that he performed for our salvation. Okay. But then the good education is where you can particularize it. They hammered home how much our parents were sacrificing. Okay. Joe, even the rich kids, take a well-to-do family from West Orange now. Okay. Let's say they do well, husband and wife. Okay. Joe, Seton Hall Prep is $18,000 a year. I don't care how much money. I don't care how much money you make. You're sacrificing as a parent. Okay. Let me say, and you're not worth $1 gazillion if you live in suburban Essex County. You're doing well. Don't get me wrong. Okay. But you're not super duper duper rich. Okay. 18 grand per student. And a lot of parents have multiple kids in Catholic education. So you could double and triple that number in a lot of cases. You're going for a lot of money. You are sacrificing something to send your kids to those schools.
Well, it like I said, it shows in other areas. I've seen it. I'm just telling you, because I've done both. I went to public grammar school. I've seen both. Both aren't perfect. You're never going to find the perfect school, but I believe in a Catholic education. There's no question in my mind. I think, again, it bears a better outcome. I believe in it. 100%. 100% believe in it.
Absolutely.
Could it get better? Of course it can. Are there better Catholic schools out there than others? Of course there are. But I believe in a Catholic education. frankly, they got to make it more accessible again to all types of people. The church has to get a little bit more creative. It's gotten too expensive, and it's sad because
Yeah, it is. It really is, because look, I think when my brother first started Seton Hall Prep, the tuition was like, I think it was like 2,100 a year. By the time I got there a couple of years later, it was 2,300 a year. Okay, nobody's going to tell me that $2,100 in, let's say, 1980 is the equivalent with inflation of $18,000 now. I know it's more adjusted for inflation. It's not 18. It's out of the hands of now working class people
oh,
to
absolutely.
send their kids for that great education, okay, that you'll get at a Catholic school. It's starting to get out of the reach of working class people. But these schools were founded for working class people. You know, even Notre Dame as a university, okay, that was meant for Catholic parents, the children of Catholic immigrants, to send their kids to get a Catholic education. Joe, most parents cannot afford
No,
75 grand a year to send their kid
no
to
way.
Notre Dame. I think you're right. They need to remember their Catholic mission, and they need to get creative, and they need to start reducing the prices of their education. They have to. If you want to be an authentically Catholic school, you have to make it affordable. You have to make it more affordable.
I would agree. It's a good way to end it. Um, and this is, I think we got a little bit more than 10 minutes left. We'll talk a little bit about Bill Donahue. He's definitely someone that comes on the show. We've interviewed him actually on the Veritas channel. It was our first interview. But Bill, we talk about a lot of the articles that he puts out in the Catholic League. He's the president of the Catholic League, and he wrote something on the House abortion bill that just went out. It's a reactionary bill. Nancy Pelosi put it out, and Biden and team. It's HR Bill 3755, called the Women's Health Protection Act of 2021. Just to throw out there some of the ideas that are in this bill, because I think it's important that we do that, but also to look at history. And Bill Donahue kind of breaks down a little history. He basically says the bill maintains that abortion restrictions are a tool of gender oppression. If this is true, why were Americans first feminists staunch opponents of abortion? Now he gets specific. In 1858, Elizabeth Cady Stanton spoke about the murder of children, either before or after birth. She branded it evil. Similarly, Susan B. Anthony called abortion child murder and infanticide. When did abortion restrictions become a tool of gender oppression? In the 60s. Now, it's interesting how that has gotten twisted. Again, it's a cultural thing because of the sexual revolution. And it's very sad. But Donahue continues, and he said the new bill would abolish the requirement that abortion can not only be performed by a physician — we've seen this in New York — thus allowing midwives, nurses, and doctors' assistants to do the job. The bill also eliminates health and safety regulations that are specific at abortion facilities. I thought it was pro-women. That doesn't seem pro-women to me. Also, the bill talks about the reproductive justice and the necessity of opposing restrictions on reproductive health, including abortion, that basically can go all the way up to the moment of birth, third trimester abortion. And a doctor that does not legally have to perform that procedure. Insane. Absolutely insane.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, clearly, Joe, and I'd love your comment. I mean, they put this out, I think, is a reaction to Texas, as a reaction. It's not going to pass. It's not going to pass. No chance, no how.
Joe Rossinello's favorite line at the front line with Joe and Joe is, when it comes to certain issues, it's a loser.
Oh, it is. Absolutely. It's dead on arrival, even in the Democratic Party.
Bills like this, okay, when you start talking to some, and there are really no real moderate Democrats, at least anything we see, but those that are in tight races and tight districts, when Nancy Pelosi says to them, oh, you got to support this bill, they're going to say, kick rocks, Nancy. No, I'm not supporting this bill, because even those people in my district who consider themselves pro-choice are not in favor of this, okay? They actually believe, I think wrongly, they actually believe in safe, legal, and rare, as Bill Clinton once made famous. Okay, they're not going for this, but it's, as you said, they're trying to make this federal law, because you got Mississippi and Texas and others that are asserting states' rights when it comes to abortion. Obviously, the Supreme Court recently refused to hear the Texas case. Okay. The Texas Supreme Court said nothing on the issue. Okay. And they appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, we don't have any problem with the Texas law.
Well, you know,
Now,
it's
John
funny.
Roberts did. Okay. But the so-called conservatives on the court and the ones that Trump put up, they said, no, we don't need to hear this case. Just fine by us.
It's interesting. That could be actually like a sign of something to come with Dobbs. And frankly, even from a political perspective, maybe they think that if they give it back to the states, they overturn Roe and basically say you could do what you want in each state. So I'll just use an example. If you're in Illinois and you want to have abortion, that's your business. But if you live in Alabama and you don't, that's your business too. I think that could happen. And if it does happen, I'm going to be honest with you, Joe, the door is wide open. It's a matter of time before it's abolished completely. It's a cultural behavior. This bill, I mean, this law that came out of like Roe v. Wade basically was a knee-jerk reaction to the sexual revolution. The sexual revolution took place and casual sex became the law of the land, and it still is the law of the land, and abortion basically condoned it. It basically said that if something happens as a result of your behavior, you can get rid of it. Well, guess what? It's not constitutionally sound. It simply isn't. And science has proved it to be the case.
Well,
and Joe, I'm telling you, this is something to watch. People should be very, very attentive to this Dobbs case.
Listen, if you have a culture in a particular state that's pro-life, that abolishes abortion, that's going to bleed over into other states. The left knows this. That's why they need to have this child murder imposed on the whole country. Let me give you an example. The state of Missouri, de facto, okay, because I think abortion is legal in Missouri, but it's so restricted. De facto, abortion is basically illegal or doesn't exist in Missouri because there is no abortion clinics. They put Planned Parenthood out of business. And that culture of life. So if you're a young girl who unfortunately goes out and you make a mistake and you went out and had sex and you shouldn't be, all right, and you got pregnant, well, you're going to have that baby. Either that or you're going to let the governor of New York pay your expenses. You're going to come to New York to kill your baby. Okay. But in the state of Missouri, they're going to foster a culture of life. They're going to say, no, we don't have abortions here. And that's going to spill over into other states. And I agree with you. That could be a germ, a seed that spreads throughout the culture. Okay. Maybe if Roe versus Wade is overturned, maybe some of these states will just outright ban abortion, which is what they should do. And each state under their constitution should recognize a right to life, which would, by the way, outlaw all abortions. And hopefully, you know, it causes a groundswell, which is eventually going to lead to, as in the case of other sins that America has committed, will lead to rectifying those sins. But this idea that, you know, Roe versus Wade is going to, I mean, all it's going to do is maybe encourage pro-life people, help us to focus our efforts more on states that are so rabidly pro-death, like New York and California and New Jersey and Connecticut. Help us to focus our efforts more because we won't have to focus our efforts as much in states like Texas and others. It would be a good thing, but I hope nobody thinks that overturning Roe versus Wade is the bee's knees. It's not. It's only a step. And the step is the movement, as we always say, towards A, abolishing abortion, and B, respecting human life, because all human life is created by God, and we need to recognize that in America if we're gonna stop our being, like Clarence Thomas said in our first conversation, being adrift. Because Joe, the further abortion goes in this country, the further we are to being broken.
Oh,
now,
no
there's
doubt.
some who might argue that we are already a broken nation. I'm going to err on the side of we're adrift, severely adrift. Okay. Outlawing abortion, at least in many, many, many states, would go a long way to bringing us back on course. And hopefully we can get completely on course.
Well, once again, I recommend all our listeners to read the First Things article in October, Roe Must Fall Symposium. A lot of good stuff in there. And a couple of the authors also talked about the next step if Roe is overturned is you have to encourage families to have children. One of the things that a lot of people, and this is why I was educated by these articles in First Things, most abortions take place among the poor. It's a fact. That's why 85% of Planned Parenthood clinics are in walking distance to minority neighborhoods. That's a fact. You want to talk systematic racism? That is systematic racism right there. Also, the majority of abortions take place with women who are Black, number one. Number two, they only have a high school education. That doesn't mean abortions are in other places, but these are things that we have to talk about because, frankly, Joe, this is where the conservatives aren't on board, particularly fiscal conservatives. You got to help people a little bit. Like the structure has to be, how about like what Hungary does? They reward people that have big families with tax breaks. Like there's things that we have to do as a nation to not just eliminate legally the abortion option, but to gear the nation towards having families and stable ones. You see, we're adrift on that too. And that's where the Republicans have to get on board. And I'm not talking about giving money away like candy, but what I am talking about is how about we establish stable economies, jobs, corporate America, where you have some stability, where you reward families for having like having children, tax breaks, helping people. You see, the Republicans have to get on the side of the regular guy a little bit more.
See, one of the things I love about conversations, one of the things I love about the conversations that we have at the front line with Joe and Joe is that we'll start with a talk about abortion and we'll get to economics. But being that you mentioned it, okay, I want to comment because it's something I think a lot about. Okay, what do we value in this country? You see, we value economic growth. We actually not only value it, we damn near idolize it. All right, it becomes an idol. Economic growth, maximizing the bottom line. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is you reminded me what I would prefer. How about economic stability with high wages, with mothers at home raising their children, with a tax rate or, well, we won't get into my personal theories about the income tax rate, but let's just say a tax rate that reduces income taxes for each child you have. In other words, almost to the point where you're paying very little in income tax, okay? Because you're incentivized to provide for your family, okay? Why is it that we focus on, and conservatives are guilty of this, Joe, we make idols out of maximizing the bottom line or economic growth? No, it's not economic growth at all costs. If the economy grew moderately over time, but we had a house built on rock, an economic house built on rock as opposed to an economic house built on sand and usury and consumerism. If we had stability, in other words, where we can project into the future without violent shocks to our economy because of the fact that our economy is built on sand, I'll take stability over economic growth any day.
Oh, absolutely.
That means I could get up and go to work and my income and the economic growth is much more predictable, okay, than what we have now. But we have an economy built on sand. And so it's important because I wanted to mention that because you brought up stability. Stability is not emphasized as much by conservatives as much as economic growth. And I say screw growth. In other words, if it's a trade-off between stability and growth, I'd rather have the stability.
I mean, because conservatives sometimes talk a good game about the family. Well, guess what? You got to pay the bills, and that's real. And you have to construct systems that allow you to do it. And again, that's what these articles, two of them talked about specifically, is helping these poor people who are having the lion's share of the abortions and basically structuring things. Again, I'm not talking about just giving money away like candy. I'm talking about establishing systems, models to help them and encourage them to have their children.
I'll throw out another one to you. Okay. You have the state of Texas, by the way, all those heartless Texans, okay, that have basically effectively banned abortion. Because Joe, let's face it, well, a heartbeat bill is nearly the same, not exactly the same. You might as well just ban abortion. But having said that, all those heartless Texans, according to the left, they have $100 million in their state budget for the social services that women need. In other words, that find themselves in what we'd call crisis pregnancies. Okay, I'll give you one step further. We waste we waste trillions in this country. Okay, so when you're talking about $1 billion is nothing to the federal government. If you wanna fight the culture that says that we should allow for abortions in the case of rape, I would say I would make a modest proposal. Okay, the government set aside a relatively small amount of money. It wouldn't be a lot of money, and any woman who gets pregnant as a result of a rape is able to get all the psychological counseling they need, all the spiritual counseling they need, paid for free. Okay, they don't have to pay any bills for 9 months. Okay, they don't even have to work for 9 months. Okay, in other words, to encourage them to bring their child into the world. In other words, we waste so much money. In other words, women who've been raped don't want to compound that rape by killing their baby in an abortion. But a lot of the times they feel like they don't. Like, this is where conservatives would say, no, it's not our responsibility. Well, maybe we should make it our responsibility. I think that's what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, that's like what they're talking about. A couple of the authors in there talk about that. That's the next step. Catholics, listen, don't get me wrong. We take care of children and mothers. We've interviewed a number of people, Sisters of Life, Good Counsel Homes. I mean, there are many organizations out there that take care of women, but also just from our society isn't family centric anymore. It's very difficult to have a big family. It just is. Because again, it also, listen, it costs money. Yeah. You could have all the faith in the world, and and believe me, I'm not like a lunatic about money, but it's real. Bills, diapers, food, rent, mortgage, even living modestly. We're not family centric. That's part of being a pro-life culture, is being pro-family. The government has to be honest with you, particularly conservatives, fiscal conservatives, have to think about that a little bit more and have to build that into the system. And I'm not talking about on these stupid ass programs and throwing money at people. I'm talking about building models that are pro-family. How's this one, for instance? Give people tax breaks that stay married. You stay married. You're married. You get a tax break for that. You have tax breaks for having children. You get a tax break for being married, because people who are married and stay married are less likely to be poor. Right. That's a fact in America. So reward it. I'm just using, I'm not an economist, but these are things where it's a pro-family society. If we heal the family in America, we heal the country.
Right.
But we attack things from these ridiculous angles. We don't address the problems. Because
to address the problem means that particularly from conservatives, that means that conservatives are going to have to put down some of their own behavior. And they're not willing to do that either. See, conservatives they like a guy like Mitt Romney, let's say. If Mitt Romney truly lived up to the principles of conservatism, okay, he wouldn't have been a thief his entire career. And I say that, I'm not accusing him of being a thief, but when you steal the wealth of a company through debt, which is what Bain Capital basically did, okay? In other words, then that means that he can't be in the business. See, a real authentic economy doesn't allow for the Bain Capitals to exist, okay? They don't. You can't go into a company that's publicly traded and dangle a carrot of money in front of their face, knowing that they're never going to pay it back, and you're going to drive that company into the ground and make millions of dollars. Now, I'm just using that as an example. conservatives need to get it through their head. If you're conservative, that means you're conservative on economics. You're conservative on moral values. You're conservative on the role of the family, the role of intermediary institutions between the power of the state and the individual. You're conservative on all these things, not just what you choose to be conservative on. Who did we cover recently? Joe said conservatism nowadays is just progressivism at a slower pace.
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it comes down again, that's modeling your life after Christ. The truth. We're not a tribe, a political tribe. Like, it's about the truth. And frankly, part of that is helping people. I mean, helping people. Those who've been given much, much is expected. And to be a truly a society for life, you also have to think about that as well.
Right.
And the government should look at it that way. And frankly, particularly the Republicans, they have to, as you always say, Joe, they have to shed the country club image. Frankly, it doesn't relate to people, regular people, and I think they would do much better in the polls if they did that.
Well, we're going to probably have to leave it there, Joe Resinello. It would be wonderful if we had a real third party in this country that would draw from both the Democrats and the Republicans, a party that protects life, that's socially conservative. But then, it's not a bad government intervention is not a bad phrase. I used to think it was, but then as St. Paul said, when I was young, I thought like a child. Knows you have to grow up. Government intervention in a lot of areas is not a bad thing. The abuse of that government intervention is our problem as conservatives. That's what we need to fight against. But we do have to leave it there. We want to thank you all for joining us at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. And thank you for listening to us on the Crusade Channel, your home for the Mike Church Show, Crusade Channel News, the Barrett Brief, and the Kennedy Profession. From sun up to sundown, the Crusade Channel is the last live radio station standing.